But it seems to be that we do have a much more assertive Eastern Bloc, this sort of Eastern Sentinel idea, versus Western European nations, which remain somewhat complacent. I mean, the French have now had yet another political crisis. The Prime Minister seems to have resigned after less than a month. Are we going to see a unity? Yes, but almost like an Eastern Europe, which is more proactive, leading, and then sort of Western Europe, which remains a little bit complacent, which could still therefore work in the favor of Moscow because they can try to drive that wedge between West East. Or that's not a scenario you think is very plausible?
Well, I think I was happy to see the Chief of Defense of the French Armed Forces just the other day says that French forces have to be ready to fight tonight. That's a new, recognition of the need for readiness. And then I just read a piece by the French commander responsible for transport, talking about the challenges of moving from west to east fast enough. So I think the French get it, certainly in the military. The UK, for the most part, seems to get that. But there is a sort of a condescension that comes from Western Europe, particularly Germany and the Netherlands, towards Poland and Baltic countries. You saw the former German Bundeskanzler Merkel. She just did an interview and said that it really was the fault of the Baltic states and Poland that Russia invaded Ukraine. That's ridiculous. But there is some of that still there. But the United States, we have failed to do what needs to be done to provide the leadership and impetus. So we're going to end up mucking along until there's a disaster. But I'm tired of hearing people shake their fists, say, we need to do something. We need to go faster. I was just in Spain myself this past week at a conference, and the people, they all nod their head like, yes, we've got to do more. But, Spain's a 1%er right now. So, or they're definitely not a 2%er, I should say. So until people wake up and realize that Russia, this is not a game, then we're going to continue to have some challenges. In the meanwhile, people that live closest to Russia know Russia the best, from Finland all the way down to Romania. They're not confused.
No, they're not. And I guess my last question for you would simply be, what would you, if you were standing in front of the relevant people, what would you be telling them to do? Because to expand on what you just said, we do have a political crisis at the moment. The political military relationship in certain countries is not great. Britain, we have a economic situation, lots of instability in terms of like populism. We've just seen Czechia's result there, which might not be a major shift, but it's still a concern that we're growing. These populist threads do underline a lot of the more mainstream or whatever conventional parties. So what would your final thoughts or emphasis be to anyone that actually had positions?
Well, our political leaders need to speak to us as if we're adults and explain what's at stake and to have our eyes and ears wide open. That if you don't push back, if you don't show strength with Russia, they're going to continue to do what they're doing, disrupting maritime traffic, violation of international law. One of these Shadow Fleet vessels is going to break. They're all end-of-life vessels, and you're going to have a gigantic environmental disaster on the shores of some European country on the Baltic Sea. The impact of drones shutting down airports. I mean, Munich airport was shut down twice in the last week because of drones. There's a huge economic impact when people cannot fly in and out, business people, commerce, etc. And so I think the Russians are playing a very dangerous, reckless game, but they feel pretty confident that we're not going to do anything about it. So at some point, there'll be a disaster that will force us to wake up. I just hope we can wake up before the disaster.